Hey guys, this is Derek from One River Tea. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at two different teas, both in our spring and autumn sample set. First off, if you like these tea tasting videos, if you like our material, please like and subscribe. Your contributions will really help this channel to grow. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a spring harvest and an autumn harvest, Dancong Oolong. I'll give you guys a close-up on these leaves here in a second, but the main difference here is the farmers say spring is all about the mouthfeel, where autumn is all about the fragrance. And so what we've done on the onerivertea.com site is we've put a little sample box together of a spring and an autumn Dancong varietal produced by the same producer from the same trees. The only difference is the picking season. And so we're going to kind of explore that here in a sec. But real quick, if you take a look at these leaves very closely, what you will see is that the spring harvest is much more roasted. It's much more twisted. The leaves are a little smaller. You can see a little less green in it as compared to the autumn harvest, also called the snowflake tea. This is a snowflake Dancong, and you can see the leaves are very large. A lot of green is left in these leaves. A lot of times this snowflake harvest, this winter or autumn tea, is not charcoal roasted, it's only electric roasted. And so that really helps give it the difference in flavors. Another thing that the producers can do when making these teas is kind of tweak the yashixiang process. The yashixiang is the process where they wither the tea and they shake wilt it. And so this creates slight oxidization, but not complete oxidization. For those of you who do not know, the green teas are unoxidized teas, where the black teas are fully oxidized, the red teas are fully oxidized, and oolong teas fit somewhere in the middle. And a lot of times the producers making these really fragrant forward Dancong oolongs want to oxidize it to the peak fragrance, to the fragrance they want, and then they kill the green, they fix it. And so I think that these autumn harvest teas, they let the yashixiang process go a little longer, that way they get the flavors they're wanting. So, without further ado, let's brew these teas up. So, real quick first impressions. I've put 6 grams of tea in both of these containers, both of these gaiwans. The leaf size is already very noticeable. Whew! Okay. This aroma on the autumn, on the snowflake harvest is just incredible. It's full in the face flowers, fresh grass and leaves. This is a slightly anachronistic because you would assume that the autumn harvest, the winter harvest, has less of this spring aroma, but I feel like this has the aroma of spring. It has flowers, cut grass, very, very grassy and vegetal. And just immediately, right off the bat. Where this one, this spring harvest, is much more fire, much more roasted, much more charcoal. You get a lot of that pine smoke, a little bit of sap in it, but not a lot of grassy spring freshness. Again, the color of these leaves are already changing considerably. This tea here is very, very much more opening up into greenery. Where this tea here, you can see that kind of complex autumn coloration. So, this is just the rinse. I usually rinse these Dancong teas. And again, as I mentioned, I'm using about 100 milliliter gaiwans, 6 grams of tea in here, and I'm using boiling water. That's one thing that the tea producers in the Phoenix Mountains always got on my case about when I was brewing tea for them and their clients. They kept saying, keep the water boiling. Because I would get lazy with it. I would boil the water and then let it sit for a while. And they always say, hit it with boiling water because it really shows you the flavors. Though, when you are brewing with boiling water, you have to be very careful not to oversteep the tea. Dancong teas in particular can be oversteeped very quickly. So, thus I'm pouring these one at a time because the matter of 3-second difference between this one and that one is huge, especially on these first steeps. This is my very nice Jingdezhen wood-fired gaiwan. It's beautiful, it's begun to craze. This is a relatively cheap gaiwan that I got just in a Chinese tea store, but I really like the patterning. This was also slightly larger, as you can see. This is maybe 120 milliliters, where this is maybe 100. So, the color of this spring versus autumn, very similar. The aroma off the liqueur, this is a very umami, slightly sweet, where this is still has that vegetation, has that spring flowers right in it. So, whew, off the leaves. Wow, this is almost celery-like. It's so intensely vegetal. Let's see. With this spring tea, that's that warm roast. And right now, I will tell you, it is January 2021. So this tea has been picked, made, and let sit for about 6, 7, 8 months. And right around this time, the roast, the heavy roast, begins to meld into the tea, into the tea leaves. And it's just, let me tell you, there's a beautiful melding going on. So we'll see if it translates into the cup. Again, this is the spring and autumn yashixiang. Yashixiang in Chinese means duck shit fragrance. And they used this term back in the day, supposedly, because they wanted to keep this tea to sell to the local market. They didn't want to export this tea. And because tea is so popular in China, if you have a really nice tea, that'll get exploited very quickly. And so they called it the duck shit fragrance because they didn't think Chinese people would appreciate it and buy it. So the locals all knew the duck shit fragrance had the best flavors. But usually in my experience, the yashixiang, or the duck poop fragrance, has a very good mouthfeel, has a very, very good body. It's very thick in the mouth, very buttery, very oily. The spring in particular. The autumn, on the other hand, is my first experience with the snowflake harvest dancongs, and it's just so, like, the bouquet is so strong. The roast is so light, so we'll start light and then go darker. So this is the autumn harvest of the yashixiang. It's very, very light on the tongue. I get a sweetness in the sides of the tongue, sides of the mouth. Yeah, this tea is wonderfully light. It's, the first infusion, so it will wake up in time, but for the moment, it is really, really refreshing. Drinking that cup in a quick succession when it's that hot, I'm getting a little bit of a huigan in the back of the mouth. I'm getting this kind of freshness on the tongue. I wouldn't say this, not necessarily that deep huigan, that thick oily presence in the mouth, but more of like a sweet, like a mentholated kind of coolness on the tongue. So, ooh. Wow, that is something like very, very fresh wood, cedar, pine sap, with a little bit of the grass cut in there. So let's move on to the spring. That was the autumn harvest, as they call it in the Phoenix Mountains. They call it the snowflake harvest. Usually happens late October, early November. So here's the spring harvest. The spring harvest happens usually in April. Yep. That is incredible on the tongue. Very, very thick, very coating, oily, buttery. So a few phrases in Chinese. Kogan. Kogan is the mouthfeel. And you can say a kogan is very shufu. Shufu is comfortable. And I love this terminology because it doesn't even tell you what's really going on. It just tells you, like, wow, that's very pleasant. Like, oh, 这个口感很舒服. But one thing about this tea is This tea is very well balanced. It doesn't have huge extremities. It's not over the top about fragrance, over the top about roast. It has this beautiful blend of leaf, of roast, of mouthfeel, of fragrance. So let's give these wet leaves a smell here. Mmm. Yeah, I'm getting a huge amount of umami from this. I just made a really thick stew last night. And that's something that I'm getting out of this, that kind of uh, like roasted meats, that kind of salt and savoriness. Alright. So, that was the first infusion, the initial impressions on the wet leaves. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward here and show you what the third infusion tastes like, because the third infusion, in my opinion, is when you really get to the core of the tea. Okay, so I just finished drinking the second infusion, and these teas are developing at a different rate. This winter, the snowflake harvest, the autumn harvest is really quickly evolving, where this spring harvest is slowly unraveling. So it makes me consider that the third infusion might be the peak infusion for this tea, but maybe the second infusion was the peak for the autumn harvest. So real quick, let's smell the leaves. Yeah, so these leaves are starting to open up more. They have a lot more greenery to them. I'm getting something like toasted rice. Something very much on the baking side, toast. Where this tea, so some of the grassiness is kind of deepened in a way where it reminds me of cinnamon, something like very, very spicy, like cooking spices, really rich flowers. So I've just heated up the water to boiling point. I'm going to brew these up for the third infusion. Again, I'm going to do it one at a time because I want to be sure that my timing is accurate. So for the third infusion, I'll give these guys about 15 seconds. Though, of course, as you can see, I'm not quite timing it. It's just more something I do by feeling. So it should be about right. The liqueur is very good. It's not too dark, very clean, a nice gold. So that's one thing I love to see about these teas, is how clean the liqueur can be. So, that said, let's see what this winter harvest looks like. Sometimes the winter harvest, being a later harvest in the year, usually being lower mountain, that's another key point. High mountain teas, especially the Dancong teas, they never make snowflake harvest. They never make autumn harvest. They never make winter harvest. They usually, the highest mountain, the oldest trees, they only harvest one time per year, and that's in spring. So, that said, these teas, they both come from a mid-mountain farm. So, as you can see, that liqueur is very, very similar. So here's the autumn harvest, and here's the spring harvest. Usually the spring harvest is darker than the autumn, but these two look very similar. Whew. Yeah, I'm getting something a little more roasty, not quite roasty, a little more spicy than floral and vegetal. The leaves are opening up, as you can see here. Hopefully you can see they're getting much more oxidized. You can see them brown a little bit, a little green. Whereas as the roast fades from this tea, the spring tea, you see a lot more greenery in there. So, oh yeah, this is like old books, like wood. Very, very good. So this is very much more woodsy, more roasty, with a little bit of that pine sap underneath, where this is more grassy, more vegetal, much more spicy. So let's pour these teas and see. Again, this box here, this sample set we're doing for the onerivertea.com on the website, is called the Spring and Autumn Sample Set, and it builds off a saying we hear in China a lot, especially in the Dancong region. We hear them say, 春水秋香, which is the idea that spring water, winter tea, winter fragrance. Spring water, autumn fragrance is how it translates. And this is the idea when they're making these teas. The spring harvest is all about the mouthfeel, the kogan, where the winter harvest, the autumn harvest is all about the aroma. And that said, as I mentioned earlier, usually you get more longevity out of these spring teas. You can get 7 really nice infusions. With the autumn teas, the winter teas, maybe you're looking at 4 infusions, 5 infusions before it starts fading off. I'm getting a lot of the toast on the tip of the tongue, something a little sweet in the way that like cooked bread is sweet, in the way that malted barley is sweet, oatmeal sweet. It covers the tongue, it really settles in the back of the throat. For me, this is a very good example of what a yashixiang should be, what a duck shit oolong should be, because they should be very buttery. The duck shit fragrance usually isn't as aromatic as the milanshang or the honey orchid, but usually it's more in the mouthfeel, in the thick, oily coating. For the spring teas. For the autumn teas, you're looking at something that should be much more in the nose. Yeah, and that's an incredible experience here because while the spring teas, when you drink them, they settle down in the throat, the autumn teas, when you drink them, they rise up into the head. You can feel it in the back of the soft palate, rising up through the nose. Okay, maybe I misspoke. This third infusion for the autumn harvest, the qingxiang yashixiang as we call it, is really, really good. This is where you're starting to get a little more of the mouthfeel, the oiliness of the leaves coming through because it is the same varietal. It's just processed in a slightly different way. And there's a lot more softness on the mouth here. I'm going to get this spring harvest one more try here, just because I want to see, after coming back and forth, it's very, very interesting. Yeah, the spring is still much more superior on the taste of the tongue, on the mouthfeel, on the way it settles in the back of the throat. Wow. It's really amazing because, as we mentioned earlier, this is the same tea, the same trees, the same varietal, the same land, the same producer. The only difference is this is made in the spring, this is made in the autumn, and as the producers are making this tea, they're going for different objectives here, right? For the spring, they're going for something that's better in the mouth. In the fall, in the autumn, in the winter, they're going for something that's better in the nose. And so it's really amazing to see. Dancong is one of the most versatile teas there are out there. There's over 200 different varietals, and yet looking at a single varietal, harvest times change it, producers change it, elevations change it, and so there's really no end to the possibilities with Dancong teas, which is why we've really devoted ourselves to it with the One River tea. We're really all about the Dancong oolongs, the white teas from Fuding, and we're getting more and more into the teas of Southeast Asia, like the teas from Laos, the teas from Vietnam and Thailand, because these are all really fascinating teas to us that just don't get enough credit worldwide or credit here in China. So, well, thank you for watching. I really love this session and can't wait for more people to try these tasting boxes because I feel like it's truly an experience. And so if you do get your hands on one of these tasting boxes, check out this video again, maybe drink tea alongside with me. In the meantime, if you like this content, give us a like, give us a subscribe, and we'll keep creating these tea tastings, guided tea tastings with you. So again, this is Derek from One River Tea. I'll see you guys later. Cheers.